I was 5 minutes away from calling Child Protective Services when a little girl handed me a grocery receipt folded into the shape of a heart. I'm a school secretary in a small Ohio town. To most people, that title implies answering phones, bandaging scraped knees, and unjamming the copy machine. But on the hard days, the job is something else entirely. It means looking at the people, walking through the front doors, and deciding whether a family is quietly drowning. It was a Tuesday in February, the kind of gray, Midwestern day where the sky looks tired before noon. The fluorescent lights above my desk buzzed a low, monotonous hum. Wet boots squeaked across the salt-stained tile, and the heavy scent of cafeteria tomato soup drifted down the hallway. And right on schedule, at exactly 8:07 a.m., Emma walked in. She was 6 years old, swallowed up in a faded pink coat that had clearly belonged to an older child first. One sleeve hung longer than the other. The zipper was hopelessly jammed halfway down, and her grip was locked around a battered purple lunchbox featuring a unicorn missing an eye. But it wasn't the clothes that caught my attention. Every morning, Emma looked profoundly exhausted. Not the heavy-lidded sleepiness of a child who stayed up late watching cartoons, but a deep, weary exhaustion. There is a difference, and in a school, you learn to spot it. Her teachers had already started mentioning the warning signs. Emma was falling asleep on the rug during reading time. She was caught hoarding saltine crackers from the lunchroom. She kept asking if she could take the leftover milk cartons home. None of it was dramatic on its own, just enough small, quiet things to make a knot form in your stomach. One afternoon, her first-grade teacher stopped by my desk. "I think something's wrong at home," she said softly. Leaning over the counter, I already knew. The attendance records told one chapter. The free lunch forms told another. The stack of unpaid medical notices sitting in her file told the rest. When I opened her folder after the final bell rang, the paperwork inside was unsettlingly thin. There was a mother listed, but no father. The emergency contact number was disconnected. They had moved 3 times in 8 months. I sat alone as the school emptied around me, staring at the manila folder. The mandated reporter rules are black and white. Asterisk if you suspect neglect. You report it. Asterisk, it's simple, necessary, and important. But after 22 years in public education, I'd learned the hardest lesson of all. Poverty and neglect are not always the same thing, even if they look identical from a distance. The next morning, Emma arrived 20 minutes late. Snowflakes clung to her eyelashes, and she looked paler and more fragile than usual. As she trudged past my desk, something slipped from her coat pocket and fluttered to the floor. A folded piece of paper. I stepped around my desk and picked it up. "Emma? You dropped this, sweetheart." She spun around, her eyes going wide with panic. She rushed back and took it from my hand with a careful, frantic reverence. She didn't treat it like a piece of trash. She held it like a treasure. As her small fingers gripped it, I realized it wasn't just a crumpled receipt. Someone had meticulously folded the thermal paper into the shape of a heart. The creases were worn soft, fuzzy from being opened and closed 100 times. She looked up at me, a proud little smile breaking through her exhaustion. "My mom made it." "That's beautiful," I said, my throat tightening. Emma traced the edge of the paper. "My mom says if I miss her, I can look at it. Do you miss her a lot?" She looked down at her scuffed boots. "Only at night." Then, she tucked the heart safely back into her pocket and walked down the hall. That afternoon, I sat in my office long after the buses had pulled away. The image of the receipt heart wouldn't leave my mind, and neither would the CPS intake form sitting open on my computer monitor. Eventually, I closed the window. I did something rarely do, something well outside my job description. I drove to the address listed in her file, not officially, just to look. The apartment building was tucked behind a failing discount store. Half the parking lot was swallowed by potholes and black ice. Several ground floor windows were insulated with heavy blankets instead of curtains, and a rusted shopping cart lay on its side near a dumpster overflowing with trash. I found apartment 12B. The hallway smelled faintly of cheap laundry detergent and stale. cigarette smoke. Before I could even knock, the door swung open. A woman stood there wrestling with a garbage bag. She couldn't have been more than 35, but exhaustion had carved years into her face. Her hands were red and chapped from the cold. A hospital badge hung on a lanyard around her neck. Night shift. When she saw me, her posture went rigid. The fear in her eyes was instantaneous. It wasn't the shifty look of guilt. It was the raw, paralyzing terror of someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm the secretary at Emma's school," I said, keeping my voice as gentle as possible. Her shoulders instantly sank. For a fleeting second, I thought she might collapse. Instead, she stepped aside and motioned for me to come in. The apartment was tiny, but it was absolutely spotless. An air mattress was neatly made in the corner of the living room. A plastic folding card table served as the dining area. There wasn't much food in the cupboards, but the walls were rich with care. Finger paintings plastered the refrigerator. Spelling tests with gold stars were taped proudly to the doors. A library book sat open next to a neatly folded blanket on the couch. I noticed a pair of faded blue hospital scrubs drying over the back of a chair. She followed my gaze. "I work nights," she said, her voice laced with embarrassment. 12-hour shifts, custodial. I nodded slowly. "Who watches Emma?" "My neighbor takes her until midnight." She swallowed hard, her eyes filling with tears. After that, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Emma was spending the dark hours of the early morning alone while her mother finished scrubbing hospital floors. It wasn't because she didn't care. It was because she was caught in the suffocating, impossible math of trying to survive. The woman rubbed her face, wiping away a stray tear. "I know it isn't right." "I know." Then, the floodgates opened. She told me about the sudden rent increase, the crushing medical debt from Emma's recent type 1 diabetes diagnosis, the daytime job she lost because she had to stay home when Emma was sick, the car transmission that blew out on the highway. She was trying to be everywhere at once, stretching herself until she was transparent. "I haven't slept more than 4 hours at a time in months," she whispered. I looked toward the kitchen. Taped to the side of the refrigerator was another folded receipt heart. The ink was nearly faded to white, a relic of promise and proof that even when people have absolutely nothing left to give, they will still try to hand their children hope. I drove home that night and finally deleted the draft report from my computer. For the first time in years, I threw out the rulebook. The next morning, I arrived at school an hour early and started making phone calls. Not official calls to state agencies, human calls. I called a retired history teacher who now ran the local church pantry. I called our morning crossing guard whose husband owned a reliable auto shop. I called a pediatric nurse whose teenage daughter was looking for extra babysitting hours. I called a local property manager who occasionally held decent, affordable apartments for struggling families. By lunchtime, the wheels were turning. By Friday, the picture had changed. The nurse's daughter agreed to stay with Emma overnight for a rate the mother could afford, subsidized quietly by a school fund. The church pantry delivered 3 weeks' worth of groceries. The mechanic patched the car's transmission for the cost of parts alone. A local nonprofit stepped in to negotiate the crushing medical debt. Nobody performed a miracle. Nobody wrote a giant, life-changing check. Nobody saved the world. Instead, a handful of ordinary people simply stepped up to lift one small corner of a burden that had grown entirely too heavy for one mother to carry alone. A few weeks later, Emma arrived at school. She was carrying the same one-eyed unicorn lunchbox. She was wearing the same oversized pink coat. But as she walked toward me, she looked completely different. The shadows under her eyes were gone. She looked like a 6-year-old again. She stopped at my desk. Without saying a word, she reached into her pocket and slid something across the counter. It was another grocery receipt, folded perfectly into the shape of a heart. "My mom made this for you," she said proudly. I picked it up, my eyes watering. "Why?" Emma gave a little shrug, that beautiful, careless gesture children make when they say something incredibly profound without realizing it, because you helped. Then she skipped down the hallway toward her classroom. I still have that little paper heart. It rests inside the top drawer of my desk. The thermal paper is soft from age, and the black ink faded away years ago. Every spring, when the school budget cuts loom, every winter when the administrative paperwork piles up, and every day when it feels like the world is too heavy and nobody sees the people struggling quietly behind closed doors, I'd take it out and hold it, because that blank piece of paper taught me the most important lesson of my career. Most people standing on the edge of the abyss don't need a savior. They don't need a hero. They just need a few ordinary people willing to stand beside them in the dark for a little while. Not a headline, not a miracle, just enough grace to help them make it to tomorrow. And sometimes that turns out to be the most powerful rescue of all.